How fragile is the thread that binds us? Elena Ramirez often traced the hairline crack in the azulejo tile before her, her fingertip following the delicate imperfection. Outside her small window, the Cordoban sun beat down, turning the whitewashed walls of the courtyard blindingly bright. The pots brimming with geraniums looked after by Senora Carmen downstairs. Here, in the quiet solitude of her apartment, Elena performed small miracles of repair. Gluing pottery shards, reweaving worn tapestries, skills salvaged from a dream she'd long ago set aside. A faded photograph tucked into the frame of a dusty mirror showed a younger Elena, eyes bright with ambition, standing before the grand doors of the Museo Nacional del Prado in Madrid. A scholarship for art restoration. A lifetime ago. Before life and Mateo intervened. Her fingers, nimble and precise, smoothed the adhesive along the tile's fracture. She worked with the quiet intensity she applied to everything, a habit born from years of managing limited resources, of making things last. Her own life felt like one of those carefully mended objects, functional perhaps, but forever marked by the breaks. The scent of jasmine drifted in from the courtyard, mingling with the faint chemical tang of the glue. It was a peaceful existence, ordered and predictable. Too predictable, perhaps. A solitude punctuated only by the rhythmic clang of the cathedral bells and the occasional sharp but not unkind observations of Senora Carmen. Mateo, her younger brother. The thought brought a familiar mix of affection and a low, humming anxiety she constantly tried to suppress. He was the reason for the abandoned scholarship, the endless small jobs, the careful budgeting. Since their parents' sudden death when he was barely 15, she had been everything to him. Sister, mother, provider. He was the brilliant, erratic flame to her steady wick, and she had always felt the fierce, unquestioning duty to keep his light from sputtering out. Even now, in his late 40s, she saw the hopeful boy beneath the man's growing anxieties. The shrill ring of her mobile phone shattered the afternoon quiet. Elena startled, dabbing a bead of glue from her finger. An unknown number. She hesitated, a familiar knot tightening in her stomach. It could be anyone. A wrong number, a telemarketer. But lately, unknown numbers often meant calls related to Mateo's ever-shifting ventures. She let it ring out, the silence returning, heavier now. Later, as she prepared a simple dinner, samorejo from yesterday, bread, her own phone rang. Mateo's name flashed on the screen. She answered, forcing warmth into her voice. "Mateo, how are you?" His voice crackled with an energy that immediately put her on edge. It was the sound he made when he was onto something new, something big, something potentially disastrous. "Elena Amana, you won't believe it! This is it! The big one!" He launched into a breathless description of a tech startup, something about optimizing tourist experiences using AI, leveraging Cordoba's unique heritage. Buzzwords flew like sparks: synergy, disruption, scalability, seed funding. Elena struggled to follow, the concept slippery and vague, but the underlying message was clear. He needed money, a significant amount. "It's just bridging finance, Elena," he explained, his voice dropping to a more intimate, persuasive tone. "The main investors are lined up, international guys, but there's a gap, a temporary cash flow thing. 30,000 euros, that's all. Peanuts, really, in the grand scheme. 30,000 euros. Elena sank onto a kitchen chair, the bowl of cold soup forgotten. It was almost the exact amount she had painstakingly saved over decades, her nest egg, the fund meant for a tiny workshop space, perhaps a little security for her later years. It was everything. "Mateo," she began, her voice barely a whisper. That's all I have." He countered instantly, smoothly. "Exactly, it's fate, Elena. Think of it, this isn't just for me, it's for us. Remember Mama and Papa, how they always wanted us to achieve something? This is our chance. Get us out of this rut. High returns, Elena, I promise. You'll have it back, doubled within a year. Triple, maybe." He played on every shared memory, every ingrained sense of obligation. He spoke of escaping the smallness of their lives, of finally making their parents proud. Elena closed her eyes. She saw herself, barely 20, turning down the Madrid scholarship offer, taking the cleaning job instead so Mateo could finish school. She saw the countless times she'd covered his rent, paid off small debts, always believing in his potential, always hoping this time would be different. Her logical mind screamed warnings, the vagueness of the plan, Mateo's track record, the sheer amount. But the emotional pull, The ingrained habit of sacrifice was a powerful tide. Could she deny him this chance? Could she live with the guilt if his dream failed because she hadn't believed? After a long silence, punctuated only by Matteo's expectant breathing, she spoke, the words feeling like stones in her mouth. "Okay, Matteo, okay." The relief in his voice was immediate, effusive. He promised contracts, updates, success. They would celebrate soon. When the call ended, Elena sat in the gathering twilight, the apartment silent again, save for the frantic beating of her own heart. A single perfect azulejo lay mended on her workbench, but she felt as if her own carefully constructed life had just fractured anew. Current part characters, 36 and 11. Total characters, 5,700. The first few weeks after Elena transferred the money were filled with a nervous, unfamiliar buoyancy. Matteo sent sporadic, enthusiastic messages filled with tech jargon and photos of sleek, minimalist office furniture. "Setting up the HQ," one caption read. Another showed him shaking hands with a man in a suit. Potential synergies. Elena allowed herself a fragile flicker of hope. She found herself lingering near the windows of vacant shops in the Juderia, imagining her own small sign, Ramirez Restorations. Perhaps Matteo was right. Perhaps this time things would truly change for them. She even treated herself to a small pastry from her favorite pastelleria, a rare indulgence. Signora Carmen, watering her cascading bougainvillea in the shared courtyard, squinted up at Elena's window. "Your brother seems cheerful these days, Elena." She commented one morning, her tone neutral, but her eyes sharp. "Starting some new business, is he?" Elena murmured a vague affirmation, feeling a flush rise on her neck. Signora Carmen merely sniffed. Ambition is good. Responsibility is better. Remember that, hee-ha!" The neighbour's words, though perhaps not intended unkindly, pricked Elena's bubble of optimism. Then the updates from Matteo began to dwindle. Texts became shorter, calls less frequent. When Elena did manage to reach him, his voice was strained, the earlier ebullience replaced by a forced joviality that didn't quite mask an underlying tension. He spoke of market volatility, delayed payments from clients, minor setbacks. The first promised interest payment, a small gesture they'd agreed upon, never materialized. Matteo waved it away. "Cash flow, Elena, just temporary, focusing on the big picture." Elena's anxiety, kept carefully at bay, began to seep back in, cold and insistent. She started watching her expenses with renewed, almost obsessive care. She watered down the olive oil, chose the cheapest vegetables at the Mercado de la Corredera, mended a tear in her good coat instead of replacing it. Sleep became elusive, her nights punctuated by worst-case scenarios playing out in the dark. One afternoon, driven by a gnawing unease she could no longer ignore, Elena found herself walking towards the address Matteo had given for his HQ. It was in a modern block on the outskirts of the city centre, a stark contrast to the historic charm of her own neighbourhood. She found the correct floor, the specific unit number. There was no sleek sign, no hum of activity, just a blank door. Hesitantly, she pushed it open. The room was empty. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight slanting through the dirty windows. A few discarded coffee cups littered the floor, along with some crumpled brochures featuring generic stock photos of smiling business people. There was no furniture, no computers, nothing to suggest a thriving tech startup had ever occupied the space. Just emptiness and the faint smell of stale cigarette smoke. Elena stood frozen in the doorway, the blood draining from her face. The carefully constructed edifice of hope crumbled within her, leaving only a cold, hard certainty. He had lied. About the office, about the progress, likely about everything. The 30,000 euros, her life savings, her future, gone. She backed away slowly, pulling the door shut with a soft click that echoed the closing of a chapter in her life. Walking back towards the old city under the relentless Andalusian sun, the vibrant colours of Córdoba seemed muted, mocking her naivety. The weight of Matteo's betrayal settled upon her, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just the money, it was the trust, the shared history, the very foundation of their bond, now revealed to be as hollow as that empty office. Current part characters, 399, total characters, 9,599. The following weeks blurred into a haze of quiet desperation. Elena functioned on autopilot, performing her repairs with mechanical precision, her thoughts a constant, churning loop of anxiety and self-recrimination. How could she have been so blind? How could Matteo do this to her after everything? She tried calling him, sending messages. At first they went unanswered. Then his phone seemed to be permanently switched off. He had vanished, leaving her alone with the wreckage. Financial pressure mounted. An unexpected plumbing repair in her apartment drained her meagre emergency cash reserve. The landlord informed her of a rent increase effective the following month. Not exorbitant, but enough to tip her precarious budget over the edge. Panic began to set in, cold and sharp. She needed that money, or at least she needed answers. She needed to confront Matteo. The thought of a confrontation filled her with dread. Elena hated conflict, always smoothing things over, always the peacemaker. But desperation was a powerful motivator. She started asking around discreetly, using the few contacts she knew Matteo associated with. Most shrugged, claiming ignorance. Finally, a reluctant acquaintance mentioned seeing Matteo frequenting a particular tapas bar near the river, a place known more for its cheap beer and gambling machines than its business clientele. Steeling herself, Elena went there one evening. The bar was noisy, dimly lit, smelling of fried food and stale wine. And there he was, hunched over a sticky table in the corner, nursing a drink, looking smaller and shabbier than she remembered. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a hunted look in his eyes. He hadn't seen her yet. Elena walked towards him, her legs unsteady. Matteo. He looked up, startled. A flicker of fear, then annoyance crossed his face. Elena, what are you doing here? His voice was rough, defensive. We need to talk, Matteo, Elena said, keeping her voice low but firm, ignoring the tremor in her hands. About the money. He scoffed, taking a large gulp of his drink. Money? What money? Look, things went bad, okay? It happens. You think this is easy? He gestured vaguely around the dingy bar. This is what happens when you try to do something big and the world conspires against you. Conspires? Elena felt a surge of cold anger cut through her fear. Or did you conspire, Matteo? That empty office? The lies? Where is the money? He slammed his glass down, drawing glances from nearby patrons. Gone. It's gone, all right. The investors pulled out. The market tanked. It wasn't my fault. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whine. You never really believed in me anyway, did you? Always judging, always expecting me to fail. The accusation, so wildly unjust, struck Elena dumb for a moment. Decades of sacrifice, of unwavering support, flashed through her mind. She had believed too much, too often. That was the problem. I gave you everything I had, Matteo, she said, her voice quiet now, devoid of anger, filled only with a profound weariness. My entire savings, my future. Matteo looked away, unable to meet her gaze. He mumbled something about bad luck, about trying to fix things. But there was no remorse in his eyes, no apology on his lips, only deflection and self-pity. In that moment, Elena saw him clearly, stripped bare of the charm and the excuses. She saw the scared, selfish boy who had never truly grown up, the boy she had enabled for far too long. The loss of the money was devastating, but the definitive shattering of the bond between them, the death of the brother she thought she knew, was an agony far deeper. There was nothing left to say. No appeal would work. No argument would penetrate his wall of self-justification. She stood up, her movements stiff. Matteo didn't look at her. Without another word, Elena turned and walked out of the bar, leaving him hunched over his drink in the smoky dimness. She stepped out into the cool night air, the sounds of the city, laughter from a nearby plaza, the distant strains of a flamenco guitar, washing over her. She felt hollowed out, utterly alone, but also strangely, grimly, clear-headed. The thread was broken. Irreparably. Elena walked home through the winding streets of Cordoba, the familiar stones cool beneath her worn shoes. The confrontation had drained her, leaving an aching emptiness where anger and desperation had briefly flared. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, each step heavy. Signora Carmen's door was slightly ajar, the scent of her evening puchero wafting into the stairwell. The older woman peered out as Elena passed. "Everything all right, hija?" she asked, her sharp eyes taking in Elena's pale face and slumped shoulders. Elena managed a weak smile. "Just tired, Signora. A long day." She didn't elaborate. There were no words to adequately explain the depth of the rupture, the finality of the loss. Back in the sanctuary of her apartment, she didn't turn on the main lights, sitting instead in the twilight filtering through the window. The 30,000 euros were gone. Pursuing legal action felt futile. a path that would only bleed her further, emotionally and financially. What proof did she have beyond a bank transfer and broken promises? It would be his word against hers, dragging their family name, what was left of it, through the mud. No, she wouldn't do it. It was a bitter pill to swallow, the taste of profound injustice coating her tongue. But clinging to anger, chasing restitution she would likely never get, felt like anchoring herself to the wreckage. Matteo had made his choices. Now she had to make hers. Survival. That was the imperative. She looked around her small apartment, at the mended objects, the carefully tended plants. She had always been resourceful, resilient. She had rebuilt her life after her parents' death, sacrificing her dreams for Matteo. Now she would have to rebuild it again, this time for herself. The grief was immense, a physical weight in her chest. Grief for the money, yes, but more acutely, grief for the lost relationship, for the brother who had chosen himself over their shared history, over her unwavering loyalty. She allowed herself to cry then, silent tears tracing paths down her cheeks in the dim light, mourning the death of the bond she had cherished and protected for so long. It felt like shedding a skin, painful and raw, leaving her exposed but strangely lighter. The illusion was gone. The heavy burden of hope for Matteo, the crushing weight of responsibility for his happiness, it had dissolved in that dingy bar. She was truly alone now. Financially precarious, emotionally scarred, but she was also, perhaps for the first time, entirely her own. The following morning, Elena woke with a sense of grim determination. The sadness hadn't vanished, settling instead into a quiet ache beneath her ribs, but the paralyzing despair had lifted. There was work to be done. First, she tackled the immediate financial crisis. She visited her landlord, explaining her situation with quiet dignity, omitting the details about Matteo. She negotiated a small temporary reduction in the rent increase, buying herself a little breathing room. It felt demeaning, but necessary. Next, she turned her meticulous attention to her skills. The small repair jobs she occasionally took on wouldn't be enough. She needed consistent income. Remembering her long-dormant passion, she polished her modest portfolio of restoration work, photographs of repaired ceramics, small pieces of furniture brought back to life. She visited local antique shops, small museums and artisan workshops, places she had only dreamed of associating with professionally. Rejection was frequent. Her lack of recent experience, her age, the limited openings, the reasons varied, but the outcome was often the same. Yet Elena persisted, her quiet resolve unwavering. She refused to be defined by Matteo's failure, by her own misplaced trust. She started taking her own crafts more seriously, the small, intricately painted tiles inspired by Moorish patterns, the carefully woven miniature tapestries. She learned how to photograph them effectively and listed them on an online artisan platform. Sales were slow at first, a few euros here and there, but each small transaction felt like a victory, a tiny affirmation of her own worth and capability. She found part-time work cleaning at a nearby pension 2 mornings a week. The work was physically demanding, far removed from the delicate artistry she craved, but it paid the bills. She scrubbed floors and changed linens with the same focused diligence she applied to restoring a cracked vase, finding a certain satisfaction in the tangible results, the immediate order brought from chaos. Her life became a patchwork of mending, cleaning, crafting, and budgeting. It was exhausting, humbling, and profoundly lonely. There were moments when the weight of it all threatened to crush her, when the bitterness towards Matteo surged anew. But she pushed through, anchoring herself in the small routines, the steady rhythm of work. One afternoon, while delivering a small repaired ceramic figure to an antique dealer near the Mesquita, the shop owner, an elderly man named Señor Vargas with kind eyes, examined her work closely. "This is excellent craftsmanship, Señora Ramirez," he said, peering over his spectacles. "You have a good eye, a steady hand. It reminds me of the old ways." Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest, a flicker of pride she hadn't felt in a long time. "I studied restoration many years ago," she admitted quietly. Señor Vargas nodded slowly. "I thought so. Listen, I occasionally get pieces needing more delicate work than my usual people handle. Small things, nothing grand. Would you be interested if something suitable came up?" Hope, fragile but real, fluttered within her. "Yes, Señor Vargas, very interested, thank you." It wasn't the workshop she had dreamed of. Not the career she had sacrificed, but it was a connection, a possibility, a thread of her old self weaving back into the present. She began spending her few spare moments sketching again, drawing inspiration from the intricate patterns of the mosquito's arches, the delicate floral motifs on old Cordoban leatherwork. It wasn't art restoration, not yet, but it was creation, a way of channeling her focus, of finding beauty amidst the struggle. Her interactions with Signora Carmen took on a different quality. Elena still didn't confide the full story of Matteo's betrayal, the shame and pain still too raw. But the older woman seemed to understand without words. She would offer Elena a cup of strong coffee, share a piece of torta de aceite, or simply sit in companionable silence in the courtyard, their shared presence a small bulwark against loneliness. "Life breaks everyone, Elena," Signora Carmen said one evening, watching Elena patiently mend a fraying tablecloth. "But afterwards, some are strong at the broken places. Remember Hemingway? He knew things, that one." Elena looked down at her hands, the hands that had sacrificed a scholarship, signed away her savings, scrubbed floors, and now delicately stitched thread through worn fabric. Perhaps Signora Carmen was right. Perhaps strength wasn't about avoiding the breaks, but about how you pieced yourself back together afterwards. The pain of Matteo's betrayal remained, a dull scar tissue around her heart. She knew she would likely never see him again, never receive an apology, never recover the money. That door was closed, locked tight. But other doors, small ones, were beginning to creak open, revealing narrow paths forward, paths she had to walk alone, sustained by her own quiet resilience. Months passed. The rhythm of Elena's life settled into a pattern dictated by cleaning shifts, meticulous craftwork, and the occasional small restoration project from Senor Vargas. Her online shop gained a modest following. People appreciated the authenticity and care evident in her hand-painted tiles and woven pieces. She wasn't prosperous, far from it, but she was managing. The constant gnawing fear of financial ruin had receded, replaced by a cautious vigilance. One crisp autumn afternoon, Elena found herself with a rare free hour before her cleaning shift. She walked towards the Guadalquivir River, not to the area near the bar where she'd confronted Matteo, but further along, towards the Puente Romano. The sun glinted off the water, and the air carried the scent of roasting chestnuts from a nearby vendor. She sat on a stone bench, watching the slow drift of the river, the tourists posing for photos against the ancient arches. She rarely thought about Matteo with the sharp agony of the early days. The wound was still there, but it had become a part of her landscape, like the ancient stones of the bridge, weathered, enduring, a testament to what had been lost but also to what remained. She realized she no longer defined herself solely as his sister, the perpetual caretaker. That role had been stripped away, painfully, but its absence had created space. Space for Elena Ramirez, the restorer, the artisan, the survivor. A young couple sat down on the bench nearby, laughing, sharing churros. Elena watched them for a moment, a faint smile touching her lips. There was still beauty in the world, still small joys to be found, even if her own path felt solitary. She thought about the scholarship she'd given up. The regret was still there, a ghost limb aching for what might have been. But it no longer consumed her. Her life hadn't followed the grand trajectory she'd once dreamed of, but it had its own quiet dignity, its own hard-won peace. As the bells of the Mesquita began to chime the hour, Elena stood up. Time to get to work. She walked away from the river, her steps steady, her gaze focused not on the past, but on the path ahead, paved with the small, resilient stones of her own making. She might be scarred, she might be solitary, but she was whole, strong in the broken places. Winter settled over Córdoba, bringing shorter days and a damp chill that seeped into the old stone buildings. Elena found herself spending more evenings indoors, working by the light of a single lamp, her fingers busy with clay and thread. The quiet hum of her work was a comforting sound, a counterpoint to the silence of her apartment. One evening, sorting through a box of old papers, she came across the faded photograph again. Her younger self, bright-eyed before the Prado. For a moment, the old pang of loss returned, sharp and sudden. What if she hadn't given it all up? What if she had chosen her own path then? But she pushed the thought away. What ifs were ghosts that offered no sustenance. Her reality was here, now, in this small room, with her capable hands creating something tangible, something real. Senor Vargas had recently entrusted her with a more significant piece, a small, intricately carved wooden box from the 19th century, its lid cracked and hinges damaged. It required patience, precision, all the skills she had honed over the years, both in her brief formal training and her decades of making do. Working on it felt like reconnecting with a vital part of herself. She cleaned the aged wood, carefully glued the split lid using techniques she remembered from old textbooks, polished the tarnished brass fittings until they gleamed softly. It was slow, demanding work, but utterly absorbing. As she worked, she sometimes heard snippets of news about Mateo indirectly, through overheard conversations or reluctant remarks from mutual acquaintances. He had apparently left Cordoba, moved somewhere up north, chasing another opportunity. No one seemed to know the details, or perhaps they simply didn't want to tell her. It didn't matter anymore. He was a ship that had sailed over the horizon, leaving only ripples of damage in his wake. Elena focused on the box, on the smooth grain of the wood beneath her fingers, the satisfying click as the repaired hinge moved correctly. There was a profound peace in the act of restoration, of bringing something broken back to wholeness. It was a mirror, perhaps, of her own slow internal mending. She finished the box late one night, holding it in her hands, admiring the seamless repair, the revived beauty of the object. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment that was entirely her own. It wasn't the Prado, wasn't a grand commission, but it was hers, earned. Spring returned to Andalusia, painting the city in vibrant strokes of purple jacaranda and the intoxicating scent of orange blossoms. Elena felt a corresponding lightness in her own spirit. She had survived the winter, metaphorically and literally. Her small online business was stable, the cleaning job provided security, and Senor Vargas occasionally sent more intricate pieces her way, validating her skills. She even started attending a free weekly sketching group that met in the Alcazar Gardens, reconnecting with her love for capturing beauty on paper, simply for the joy of it. One sunny afternoon, delivering the restored wooden box to Senor Vargas, he examined it meticulously, nodding in approval. Perfecto, Elena. Truly excellent. He paid her generously, adding a small bonus. I have been thinking, he said, polishing his glasses. My eyesight isn't what it was. I need someone reliable, part-time, to help with cataloguing, minor repairs, someone with your touch. Would you consider working here perhaps 2 afternoons a week? Elena stared at him, momentarily speechless. Work in an antique shop, surrounded by history, applying her skills, however modestly. It felt like a door opening onto a sunlit path. Senor Vargas, she stammered, emotion thickening her voice. Yes, I would be honored. She walked back towards her apartment building, the scent of orange blossom seeming sweeter, the sunlight warmer. She passed Senora Carmen arranging pots in the courtyard. Good news today, Elena? The older woman asked, her intuition sharp as ever. Elena smiled, a genuine unburdened smile. Yes, Senora, very good news. That evening, Elena sat by her window, not mending or crafting, but simply watching the swallows dip and wheel against the deepening blue sky. The apartment was quiet, but the silence no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like peace. The betrayal, the lost money, the broken bond, they were indelible parts of her story, scars that would always remain. But they no longer defined the narrative. She had learned the hard way that blood might not always be thicker than water, that trust could be fragile, that financial ties could sever the deepest bonds. The cost had been immense. Yet, in the quiet resilience she had discovered within herself, in the small beauties of her daily life, in the tentative steps towards reclaiming a part of her lost dream, Elena Ramirez had found a different kind of wealth. A strength forged in the fire, enduring and entirely her own. She picked up her sketchbook, the feel of the paper familiar and comforting beneath her fingers. Outside, the Cordoba bells began to ring, their ancient melody carrying on the jasmine-scented air, a soundtrack to a life quietly, painstakingly, being restored. Elena settled into her new routine. The 2 afternoons a week at Senor Vargas's antique shop became the anchor points of her week. Cataloguing dusty artifacts, carefully cleaning tarnished silver, researching the provenance of old ceramics, it nourished a part of her soul that had long been starved. Senor Vargas was a patient teacher, sharing his decades of knowledge freely. He respected her meticulousness and her intuitive understanding of objects, their history, their vulnerabilities. Her work wasn't grand art restoration, but it was deeply satisfying. She continued her cleaning job, the practical necessity grounding her, reminding her of the journey she'd taken. Her online craft sales provided a small but steady stream of income, connecting her, albeit anonymously, with people who appreciated her artistry. She saved diligently, rebuilding her emergency fund bit by bit, the memory of her previous financial devastation instilling a profound caution. She lived simply, finding pleasure in small things, the taste of ripe figs from the market, the warmth of the sun in the Alcazar gardens during her sketching sessions, the quiet companionship of Signora Carmen. She rarely thought of Matteo now. When she did, it was with a distant sadness, like remembering someone who had died long ago. The anger had faded, leaving only the scar tissue of experience. She understood now that his actions stemmed from his own deep flaws, his inability to face responsibility, his desperate need for validation through fleeting success. It didn't excuse the betrayal, but it allowed her to release the corrosive bitterness that had once threatened to consume her.